Okay.
It always says that. So,
Great. Oh,
all right.
nice. Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate
You're
you starting that
welcome.
recording. Welcome to those that are already here. I was going to wait about one more minute before we go in earnest, but that said, hello. Nonetheless, I'm Tonya Whitney. I help lead the Minnesota Change Management Network this year, and I'll help kind of kick us off with some MnCMN updates and introduce you to some other folks on our team as we go through this. But what we typically do is we try to keep it as quick as we can, 5 to 10 minutes of Minnesota Change Management Network updates. And then we try to do that quick because, man, oh man, every month, I think we have great speakers. And this is no different. So you'll get a chance to hear a bit more from Kathy Hagan about that point where knowledge management and change management come together and how to really make the most of that. So we'll introduce her in a minute too. So, and then what we do in our final 30 minutes is oftentimes, and I think that's the case tonight, Kathy's going to stick around with us, and we use that final 30 minutes to continue the debrief of the topic or talking about the topic, allowing us as members to be more engaged in it. And perhaps that also then helps us have a bit of fun with some networking then as well. So welcome. Again, my name is Tonya Whitney, and we're going to make this like we're formally getting started now, even though I used the last minute nonetheless to do the same thing. So here's what we're doing tonight on the agenda, but I'm going to move quickly past that to get us into what's up in some of our updates. So I will pass the baton over to Josh. It looks like he's our representative for membership tonight.
That's right. Thanks, Tonya. And a very special welcome to our new members. We had a really good, strong November for the group and a good start already to December. So we want to welcome all of you who are new or who are rejoining our fun and awesome group. And just to call out, we have not identified a date yet for our first new member orientation in the new year, but that will be coming out very shortly, probably February. So look for that information to come out. And again, warm welcome.
Awesome. And Josh, can you, for those that might truly be new and being like, what's a new member orientation? Or maybe they're not as new, why don't you give us a quick rundown of what we do in that event?
The goal is to get you acclimated to our group, the purpose, how we can be of value to you, and honestly, just to meet some of the new fellow members. So it's a smaller forum where you can ask the questions that you've been wondering and don't want to ask in this larger forum. So it's just a good kind of on-ramp to our crew.
Nice. Very nice. Thank you for doing that for us.
You bet.
Awesome. And then we've got some upcoming events. Doreen, I know you're feeling under the weather today. Do you want to help? Oh, you're right there. You're right in my face. You've got your beautiful face on right now. Doreen, tell everybody what's coming up.
Right in your face, as per usual. That's me. Sorry. Okay. Yes. We're really excited. In January, we're going to have a panel discussion on the state of change management. In fact, Ms. Tonya has been instrumental in pulling together some really great resources from education to professional, and really excited about that. That's going to be another virtual Change Summit. And then in February, we're going to get back together. And those of you who happen to know Shannon Rose Farrell Jackson, last year she was part of our board at MnCMN, is a fantastic, love-based, empathetic leader who's going to talk to us about engaging with our IT culture. So really excited about that one in person. We're going to do that at Horizontal in St. Louis Park. So the January summit is up on the website, so you can register for that. February, we expect to have on the website within the next week. So really excited about both of those.
Yep. And then I'll just go ahead, if you don't mind, and talk about the coming soon stuff. Josh has already indicated the dates The specific dates for new member orientations across 2023 are forthcoming. We're just right now trying to work out the timing of them in relation to the partnership that we have with ProSci to host change management certification classes. And so we're working out the timing for when we will host those. But then also, I think in January, what you will begin to hear our professional development team talk about are some other ways that we'll be showing up to add value to members. And so I think there's some really great new programming that we've been piloting that we'll tell you more about. We've been piloting it with small groups, things like book clubs. We have a coaching cohort. We'll tell you a little bit more about what's been happening with those and actually begin to have some dates for those to be in the future and be more available to everybody. Okay. All right, let's keep going here. I think we're about done with the big stuff that we try to make sure you know about. Bonnie, I'm going to put you on the spot because I want you to introduce yourself and perhaps be the one that can talk about this slide.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Tonya. My name is Bonnie Coyer. I am the Vice President for MnCMN this year. And I just want to mention we have different committees that serve this wonderful group of members and guests that join us every month for our events and for various different activities. As you can see, we have programming, which is events like this, professional development opportunities. Tonya was just mentioning ProSci, and we also have some new initiatives that we're hoping to roll out and share with you very soon. We have a group of people that manage membership, and then also our communications that go out to let you know what's going on. So just wanted to encourage you, if you have any interest, reach out to any of us on the board that are speaking today, or on that office at MnCMN.org goes to our staff group, and we can get that out to you and reach back out. So we'd love to have you connect with us if you're interested in serving in different ways and using your skills for our network here.
That's right. So that helped us quickly tell you a little bit about what's going on with our network and the way that we are serving you as members. Well, one other way we serve you is to bring freaking awesome speakers forward. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic to Doreen one more time as our programming chair, so she gets the opportunity to tell you a little bit about Kathy.
Thank you. Well, I'm thrilled that Kathy is here to do this. I have the great fortune of having Kathy as part of my programming team here at MnCMN. So she's very instrumental in helping to bring good content to you. And today we get the best because we get her. So she's got a wealth of knowledge in this area. As you can see on the screen, she spent 28 years focusing on the human aspects of organizational performance, working globally across industries in life science and knowledge management. So I just am super excited to have her here today to lead us. I told her that I would be watching the chat and interrupting her from time to time as you guys have questions and they come in. So please do feel free to add anything to chat. And I'm just going to shut up and let Kathy take over because there's lots of good content and I want to get started.
I agree with you. And my way of shutting up is, number one, to mute myself. But secondly, I'm going to stop sharing, Kathy, so that you can share your screen when you're ready.
Okay. Great. Thanks very much, Tonya and Doreen. I really am excited to be here. And part of it, Doreen mentioned once my passion around this, and I do have a lot of passion around how we do both change management and knowledge management. In my way of looking at this, as organizations and the individuals within are going through chaos and upheaval, we get to be the ones to help them kind of make sense of it all, both on a personal level and for the organization. And in my way of looking at it, that's a way of healing those folks who are going through so much as we bring benefit to the business. So with 28 years in knowledge management in companies like Pfizer and around the world, I also, having the background in change, understand how important it is to combine the two. But I think quite often in organizational change, we don't have a lot of knowledge about how knowledge management can actually work. So that's my hope for today, is that we can bring together that our ability to do both. So let me just make sure I cannot change my slide. Of course.
So I was having the same issue, Kathy. It's probably because of it being in slideshow mode. There you go. You got it.
So today, what I'd like to focus on is some of the principles about knowledge management. We don't have time to do a true knowledge management course. So this will be an overview, but it will give you an idea of, when you're working in knowledge management, what are you thinking about, and what are some of the issues that you're dealing with, and then how the knowledge management practices and principles can combine with the organizational change models and processes that we use to build resiliency, which I think is one of the keys of combining these two. Organizations are going to be able to kind of move into the future more agilely, and that's going to be critical as things change even faster than they are today. I'm going to leave with some tools for you, and because you'll have this slide deck as well, they're embedded in here. In my early career, I didn't share all of this because it's mostly proprietary. Now I'm happy to do that because I'd really like people to be able to pick it up and embrace it, but also ask questions, let me know what works for you and what doesn't, and we can go from there. I'd love your feedback. So what is knowledge management? So in truth, it's a discipline that started really in earnest in about 1994. That's when I started my career working in a consultancy in Boston. And it began as a way to think through the myriad of data, all of the data that we were combining and gathering in our organizations. And we were overloaded with all of this information, and then what do we do with it? And how do we store it? And how do we access it? So it has really evolved. You see here, Gartner Group has this is the #1 definition that's accessed or used, most frequently cited. And it talks about the cycle of identifying, capturing, evaluating, retrieving an enterprise's information assets. And that can be anything from meeting notes to reports or clinical trials. But what it doesn't talk about, to me, is the fact that the information that's outside of the organization that has been created through educational institutions or other companies or other researchers, that's also brought into the organization, and it combines with or integrates with the information we have internally. And so there's more than just what the organization itself has. It also doesn't talk about the dynamic work of the insights and ideas and collaborations. And oftentimes the processes and culture within any organization can be what brings forward those ideas or what doesn't. So it's really important to think about insights, ideas, things that you want to try, things that the organization does really well around being able to collaborate. Those things are also part of knowledge management and part of the systems that support it. So when I think of a very simplistic way of thinking of moving from the data that we have within organizations to wisdom, which is based on experience and how people apply that data, quite often you'll see this illustration. It's been around for a long time. But what I like to do is also think about what are the tools that we use to be able to move data, apply it, use experience against it, and it then can become information. So you're going from something static to something a little bit more robust, not a lot, still pretty static. But then as you start to use reports or look at dashboards and use that to make decisions, now you're moving up into knowledge. And eventually, if you do that often enough, moving up into wisdom. And wisdom can be thought about as how you make good decisions very often. So can you have a pattern of good decision-making based on all of the other kinds of data and knowledge that you're looking at and the amount of experience behind it? When you look at the left, those tools are some of what we use to manage that knowledge. The tools are changing even as we speak. There will be an influx of artificial intelligence and other ways of looking at tools that will change in the next few years. And so not only do we have to stay up with that in knowledge management, but change management will need to do the same. So when also a very simplistic, again, look at what is explicit knowledge and what is tacit knowledge. In my world, I live most often in tacit knowledge, but it's built on quite often some of the explicit knowledge that's out there. So when you're thinking of looking at change in an organization, these are the kinds of knowledge that can underpin that, and that it's really important to be aware of. So level one is the documented kinds of things, the things that we talked about basically in data. Level two, being a little bit less organized and therefore harder to retrieve or harder to use, things like meeting notes, which can be very important, but difficult to find and difficult to apply in an organization. And then there's experience-based knowledge held by the individual. And this is the most difficult to really to codify or to identify, but some of the most critical, because what you have documented is static. What you have in someone's head, that's the kind of information and knowledge that really brings value to the organization as you're able to make good decisions, good products, good customer service very quickly. So those are the types of knowledge that we're thinking of. Here's just a quick look at the difference between explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. So explicit knowledge is usually about what you do. So what are the steps that it takes to create a standard operating procedure, and what is that SOP? Or any of your project plans and milestones and that kind of thing. So those are the things that can be pretty easily codified. Tacit knowledge, which is so critical but harder to define, or why you do what you do. Why do you do it this way and not some other way? Or what are some of the assumptions that you've made based on experience that you've had in the past, or based on some of the variables that you recognize and don't even realize that you do? Experts, as Dorothy Leonard from Harvard will tell you, are very fast pattern matchers. That's part of the reason why they are so good at what they do, but they don't recognize the fact that they're recognizing patterns. They could not identify for you usually the patterns that they're using to make decisions. So those are some of the variables or the assumptions or the things that they're basing their decisions on that we would like to be able to codify or at least identify. Even things like how decisions are actually made in an organization. You can look at the org chart and that looks very static, but you know very well that's not how decisions are made. They're often made in individual meetings, or the meeting before the meeting, as we call it. And they're usually not as explicit as an org chart would state. Troubleshooting, things done by sight, smell, and touch. I've worked in the food industry quite a bit, for example, and working on a line where energy bars are made, granola bars. I've seen people who can look at the line and tell you whether or not the ingredients such as the oats have too much moisture in them just by the smell as the product goes through the line, and can therefore that quickly say, all right, we need to reduce the moisture content. And now trying to codify that and train someone else to be able to do that is very difficult, but you can. In my world, intuition, or what we think of as just that gut level idea that you have. Most of that can be codified if you're able to ask the right questions and break it down. And then things like relationships. So how do we work with vendors or partners or clients? It isn't just, do we use email or do we call them? But what were some of the things that happened in the past that have really made that relationship what it is today? So where are some of the holes that other people have stepped in that we don't want to step in again? Being able to transfer that kind of information as you're going through change can be very, very useful. Why is it difficult to transfer knowledge? Well, now we know that working remotely can be quite challenging. And we had to come to that in a very short period of time back in March of 2020. To be able to work in a way we'd never worked before meant that we're looking for knowledge in ways we never did before. So in the past, you may have been able to look at the office next door and ask somebody, or go down the hall, or find somebody in the lunchroom and ask questions. And now it's possible that you needed to find that in a database or in a server somewhere, and it can be very, very difficult. We have different ages, different learning styles, and quite often what we're told is there's just simply no time, no resources to be able to transfer knowledge. This list actually came from a study that was done 3 years ago, so a little bit before the pandemic, about what are the most difficult challenges in transferring knowledge. And you see, even at the end here, transferring knowledge is not valued. I see that in my work all the time. People will say, nobody ever wanted to know what I know before. Why do I want to tell them now when a change is happening? That's a very important thing to keep in mind as we're going through change, that if people feel their knowledge wasn't valued in the past, and now perhaps they're moving to a new job, they're having to work in a new way, or even they're being laid off, why would they want to transfer their knowledge now? So part of how you combat some of this is to always remember that this work has to be done with respect, with integrity, and it has to be very transparent. People have to know why you're doing this and understand that there is value for what they know, and perhaps we didn't value it in the way we should have in the past, but we are now. So being that authentic is really important. So when you think of change management and knowledge management, this is a very basic definition of change management. But both of these disciplines are trying to take us from one state to another state. We're moving from where we are now to where we need to get to be. Could be that we're changing software and we need to go from one process and one system to another. Or it could be that we are going through a reorganization and we need to move from one way of working to another way of working. So if you can see that the two really go hand in glove, most of the time in the work that I do, we're doing knowledge management and we think, oh, we need to apply some change management. So it was important to me to be able to turn it on its head and say, how can we also say change management needs some help from knowledge management? And I put in a few of the models of change management, and many of us here today are change management professionals. And so we're used to the fact that there's a model that we'll use depending on the situation we're in to be able to bring people along on the journey of change. And so most of us are aware of the ADKAR model, so I'm going to use that in the future. But any of the models that we have, there'll be a point at which we'll say, we need knowledge to be able to make this happen. People have to understand how to use the software, or they have to understand how to do the new job that they're being asked to do, or work in a new country, or in a new way. And so in every model, this it comes up that we need to understand how to transfer knowledge. In the Cotter's model, which is another, I think that's pretty familiar for people, you'll see it in step 5, empower action. Now I believe that step is called removing obstacles. But in that step, one of the things that has to happen is what they call training. In my opinion and my experience, training is one piece of what we need to do, but only one piece, because we have much more that we have to share to make sure that change can be successful. And I'll go into that in a minute. But with the ADKAR model, as you know, knowledge and ADKAR is awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So that's the model that's used. Knowledge, step 3, represents, in this case, how to do the change. So training and education on skills and behaviors. The word behavior there is very important, I think, because in the world of knowledge management, when you're thinking about what behaviors are needed to be able to make the change effective, you think about not saying to somebody, well, now, if quality has changed and you now have the right to say, stop the production line because I believe that quality is not being met, there's an issue, that's a new behavior. You can't tell somebody to do a new behavior. You have to tell them a story. You have to give them an idea of what that behavior looks like. So part of what we do in knowledge management is to identify the 5 or 6 stories that underpin any of the changes that we're working on. One might be, how do you handle a crisis? And if you can tell the employees a story of when a crisis, a real story, of when a crisis was handled in the past, that will help you then change the behavior in the future. Now people know what that actually looks like, what's expected of me, what am I allowed to do. Then there's the detailed information on how to use the new processes and systems. That's one of the pieces that we would think of as explicit knowledge. And then understanding the new role and responsibility. That would be both explicit knowledge when you think about what is my job description, and tacit knowledge. How do I really do that role? Not just what's on paper, but what am I allowed to do? How many decisions do I get to make? How much contribution do I get to really have? So I've put on the bottom the little demonstration or illustration of ADKAR's look at how what's needed for knowledge. And you'll see that access to or existence of required knowledge and the resources available are 2 critical key elements. In change management, we don't always get the chance to influence those 2, because whether or not knowledge exists isn't always part of the process that we do. If we're lucky, it is, and we have the resources to make it happen. But it's important for us to be thinking about, does the knowledge exist for us to do what we need to do? And if it doesn't, how are we going to make that happen? And part of what knowledge management can do is help ensure that does happen. The same thing with resources available for education and training. You can ask someone to play a new role, but if they are not able to get the education or training that they need because there's no one available or no training available, they aren't going to stay and they won't be successful. And so it's very important that those 2, especially, we can apply knowledge management against. So don't forget, ask any questions you'd like and Doreen will jump right in. So I looked at thinking about, is knowledge transfer an issue and how do you know and what do you do? So if knowledge transfer is something that you are considering as part of change, these are the steps that I recommend that you think about. So first of all, anytime a change is happening, there's a new skill set that's needed. Sometimes it's a big change. Like if I just a couple of years ago worked on a merger of 2 food distribution companies. The merger actually fell through. But as we looked at the 2 companies, we went in and did a matrix of what are all of the skills that will be needed when these 2 big companies come together for IT. What are all of the roles that are needed and the skills? So it could be anything from Java to being a solution architect, or being an IT leader, anything like that. We put that on the top of this matrix. And then we put the names of the people who actually were in the organization along the side. And we were able to say, so these are all of the things that we know we need. Here's the people. This person is an expert. This person works well on their own. This person is a learner. And to be able to map out then, what are the gaps? Where are we at? Do we have all of the skills that we need? So we could do a gap analysis. And then we could say, for those things that we don't have, who can we train? Who's interested? Who would have the capability of learning something new? Or do we want to go out and hire someone? Or do we want to rent that? Do we want to bring in a temporary person or a contractor? So being able to understand which roles are changing or impacted, and do you have the right skills that you need? And it could be a small skill. If you're making a software change, it could be that if somebody is in finance and the role is changing slightly, then perhaps that's a small change. All you have to figure out then is there anybody available to teach them? Or perhaps, do they have the capacity to learn that and the willingness? If it's a big change, it can be a whole staffing change that's needed, and the knowledge of what you need to bring in skill-wise to fill those gaps. So you look at then which roles are changing or impacted. And if you're doing a knowledge or a change management plan, you're doing an assessment of that most of the time anyway. You're doing an evaluation of impact. If you combine these two, when you're looking at the evaluation of impact and also looking at the knowledge impact, now you've got a very powerful tool to work with your internal or external client. And then are the shifting roles, are the people who are moving, do they have the skills or not? Where do you find the new knowledge to make the change? Is the knowledge that exists, let's say you have training, is that up to date? Does it exist? And who's responsible? So what you're actually developing is a knowledge transfer plan. And this plan, integrated with the change plan, can really increase your ability to be effective and bring value. So knowing also, if people must share their knowledge, and this is in larger type because this becomes a more difficult piece to do. If people must share their knowledge, do they know that? Do they understand why? Are they being rewarded? Is this being done respectfully? So are they feeling valued so they want to share their knowledge? And if people have to learn from those folks, do they understand the same kinds of things? Do they have the time? Are they rewarded for this? Do they know how to be a respectful learner? Most experts are very good at what they do, but they're not good at teaching. So what needs to happen is both the expert has to be able to be given tools to teach quickly, effectively, easily, but the learner also must be given tools to be able to learn from the expert. For example, I worked with some folks in a manufacturing facility in Cleveland, and the expert was known to be a curmudgeon, known to be somebody who just not only didn't like to share knowledge, didn't really like to talk to people. And the learner was brand new right out of college. And so he felt like he had a lot already that he knew. So the two of them bumped heads. And what needed to happen was for the expert to be given an opportunity to say, here are, if I've taught well, and if my learner knows, here are the 3 things that they can tell me that will show me they know what they're doing. It really hones the expert in on a very small amount of things that they can teach in a bite-sized chunk, not hard then for the teacher and easier for the learner. And here are the things that we're going to measure it by. When you give those 3 ideas to the learner and say, these are the 3 things that you need to know, You've given the learner the opportunity to interrupt the expert when they go off on a tangent, like you'll see me to do tonight. It gives them the right to say, this is a great story, but you told me I need to know these 3 things. Can we go back to that? So it's a respectful way of making sure knowledge actually gets transferred without saying to the expert, you're not a good teacher. And without saying to the learner, there's so much you have to learn, you're never going to get it. Everything becomes focused. So what you need to know is there a knowledge transfer plan? So you're developing a change management plan. Now you need to know if there's a knowledge transfer plan. It may not be that you're the one to develop it, but you definitely need to partner with whoever it is who is doing so.
Say, Kathy, we do have a question in chat.
Great.
John asked, who are we to send the question to? I think that was me, but not seeing the role of manager. Too many times managers do not know what we are trying to do. Training, documentation, great, but communication and evaluation of stakeholders, said he's confused. So I don't know, John, if you want to jump in and add anything else to that.
Yeah, it just seems that you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if the manager doesn't know. I've seen a lot of cases destroyed because the manager doesn't know, and they nod their head and they say, yeah, whatever, and they go on. And they don't even know what the person is trying to do. And there's such a disconnect from the project to the end user. And the only person that's going to help them, in my mind, that I have seen in my past, has been managers, mid-managers, and the guy right next to people saying, but I get your point, is the fact that when I'm looking now more at your points, everything that I'm seeing is like, okay, who's responsible to help them with this or this or this or this or this? But I think, when you have in your knowledge slide, I think one is you're missing the whole point on communication and trying to get the person, trying to get your stakeholders to get the buy-in. That's where I got disconnected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't put in a lot about communication, John, because I know that that's part of the change management plan used most of the time. And so that's part of why the two have to work together. If I'm doing just a knowledge management plan, I do a communication plan exactly like we do in change management. I do one just like that for knowledge management as well, because it's a project, it's
Yep. And I get that. It just is the fact that with knowledge management, sometimes I think there's a point that they think that the manager actually knows what that knowledge is. And I have seen too many managers not have a clue of what the process actually is, because they're managing a profit line. They're not managing the process.
I agree. Now, I'll say that if I had a manager like that, what I might do is ask some of the questions I was just talking about. Like, for example, I might say, great, I'm so glad you know this, because I need to know, so what are the 3 things that go wrong most often? And how can I address those? Or how do I know if something's a crisis or just a problem? And if it is a crisis, what do I do about it? And if the manager doesn't know, you can also give them an easy out. How often we have to work on saving face. So you can give them an easy out to say, oh, I get it. Maybe that hasn't happened with you, but is there somebody you think I can ask? And then that starts to give you another person to go to. To me, questions, when you're doing either change management or knowledge management, are our best friends. If we can ask really good questions, it can help us identify who does know, does anybody know, and how can we reach them? How can we get to them? Yeah. And I get it, John, I like your questions a lot because it is complicated. The other thing I think knowledge management and change management have in common is they can be undervalued, both of them. And so in order to make sure that there's value in knowledge management, we can talk about what we need to know in order to get something done. It's like it can become more tangible. And change management, it can feel to people sometimes like it's a little bit more squishy. We know it's not, but they don't. So I think asking questions and getting down to the heart of what it is that you actually need and even why you need it is good. I love it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We also had, Tonya asked if there are any additional elements to the knowledge transfer plan to consider beyond defining what needs to be known by the learners. So I guess she's realizing that she hadn't thought of this from a training plan perspective before.
Yes, yes. So most of the time, Tonya, when I'm looking at what else I need to know, I usually find that some of the knowledge is out of date. So there's usually some things, including SOPs, that are out of date. So when I'm looking at a procedure or process, one of the things that I like to do is bring the SOP, the standard operating procedure, into it and go through it with the expert to say, now, do these steps still work? There's a story in our KM culture that talks about in the past, there was people making a computer chip on a line. And it was at a time when there was a lot more human intervention. And so the line was going through, and one of the people who had been working on the line for years decided to retire. But she didn't worry because everything was written down. And so things went on without her. And all of a sudden, the computer chips were bad. Everything was turning out wrong. And so they brought her back in. And they said, we don't understand. We're following the standard operating procedure. And she said, oh, yeah, but everybody knows that's wrong. And so all of a sudden you realize, you think it's written down, but it may have been a year or two ago. And so you have to use those things and go back through them. So I look at processes and procedures. I like to take a look at the expert and see what hasn't been written down. What do they know that no one else realizes? And I do that by interviewing 2 or 3 people around the expert and saying, if that person were to leave, what do you worry about most? What is it that they know that no one else does? What's the hole in the fabric of the organization? So I look at those kind of things too. Does that help, Tonya? Is there other things? Okay, great.
Awesome. I have one more question from Steve Harper. He asked if you could please talk about your experience with the use of lots of contractors in terms of knowledge management. He said this is very common practice in IT, and he asked how we can put in place ongoing standard practices to handle the constant turnover that happens in those situations.
So the same company I was just mentioning, the food distributor, used 2 of the well-known large contractors that we know of for IT, both based in India. And therefore, there was not only the issue of contractors coming and going, and literally they were using probably 2,000 contractors. It was huge, the amount of people. So we actually helped them write into the contract that they had with the contracting agency the fact that there had to be knowledge transfer, that there had to be a set amount of time that a new person coming in needed to get up to speed, that had to be done by the contracting company, and that there were penalties if that didn't happen. So that's part of what you can think about. But there should be standard, and there can be standard knowledge transfer planning for every role. When you think of a role description and all of the things that somebody has to do, if you were then to sit down with the person who actually does that role, and this takes some time, but it's worth it, to say, no, it says that here that you will work with the client on gathering recommendations for this particular program. How do you do that? And that helps you to start to codify the steps of that process. So now there's probably 6 things that they do that are part of that process that are critical, but they don't think to write them down. It's really hard to do that for yourself. If you were going to sit down and say, here's what I do in my job, you will usually hit the highest level. Though I know somebody who recently retired, and I think she did a heck of a job from what I can tell of writing everything down, but it's rare. It's really important for someone else to be asking you questions, because their questions will be from the beginner's perspective. The other thing an expert does, besides being a fast pattern matcher, is that they're very quick because they jump over steps. They don't need to take a lot of the steps in between, or if they do it so quickly because they've done it so many times. But you need to know those steps. So you have to be able to ask them to kind of slow down and go back. That part of knowledge transfer can be where people say, oh, it's not worth the time unless you miss a step. So here's an example of that. Working with a plexiglass manufacturer, I worked with two guys who, again, curmudgeons, who had been there. Both of them had been there over 30 years, their whole career. They were the kind of guys with, they had the motorcycle vest on with no sleeves, and they were big and tall. And here I come in, and I know you think I'm very tall, but I'm actually not that tall in real life. So I came in with my little pad, and I'm asking questions, and they thought, they've written down everything. They don't need to do this. And so I say, what is something that you would do maybe twice a year, maybe once a year, maybe once every few years that other people haven't done? And they both said, oh my goodness, Big Bertha. And I said, what is Big Bertha? Big Bertha turned out to be an engine that was one of the engines that they would run when everything else ran out of power. It was from 1972, this engine, huge piece of machinery. And so when they showed it to me, they said, we break this down every 4 years, and no one else has probably done it, so nobody knows how. And I said, if the engine is that old, where do you get parts? They said, oh, there's a machine shop down the way, and those guys make the parts for us. And I said, how old are they? And they were about retirement age too. And then I said, how do you get them to do that? And they said, well, we bring a 6-pack of beer and we sit down and talk, and they make the parts. When would that ever have been written down? So when they retire and that machine needed to be refurbished, how would they have found the parts? So there's a lot of things that you have to sit down and just ask people. What I can do and put in our resources, there's a list of about 13 questions, including things like what most commonly goes wrong that I need to look at, or how do I identify a crisis and not a problem? And how do I handle it if it is a crisis? There's a bunch of questions like that that we can go through that will help you identify some of the knowledge. Okay. So here are the main reasons why it's tough for people to share knowledge. They don't know who to share it with. They don't have the time because they're still doing their regular job. Now you want me to teach somebody else, and I have to sit down and think about what it is I do all day. I don't even know where to begin. And besides which, nobody cares about my knowledge anyway. This is a very common phenomenon. And this will be even more difficult if what you're going through in your change is a layoff. I've dealt with a number of layoffs, and you can get people to share their knowledge, but boy, you have to be respectful and you really have to show value. But the more people are bought into what they've done and created, the more willing they are usually to share their knowledge. But these are important for you to know because this is what you'll run into, and it's not that dissimilar from change management. So here's a quote from Dorothy Leonard that I love when she says, the reason why knowledge transfer is difficult because knowledge accumulates slowly over time. It's messy. It's shaped and channeled in certain directions, but it is very messy. So you have all of this in your head, and now you're being asked to unwind it and to organize it. And it took you years to pull it together. So it's very difficult. So what I've done is I've developed categories of knowledge. So when you're thinking about how knowledge works with change, these are things, I developed these in 1996, and they've proved me right ever since. So as I'm teaching in organizations, I teach these categories to people. So when you think about organizing what's in your mind, your experience, you have organizational knowledge and relational knowledge. And these are much more, they're much deeper than what the names of the categories would suggest. So let me tell you a little more about them. Organizational knowledge. How are decisions absolutely made? And how do processes really work? And what are some of the principles around how we operate? And tell me about the culture, and tell me about the level of trust. So if you want me to share my knowledge, can I share what went wrong? Can I tell you about my mistakes, or will that come back to bite me? And what are some of the boundaries that we have that we can or cannot cross? There are stories around each one of those that are really important for us to share. And when we're thinking about making change in an organization, these really come into play. But because they're a little bit harder to recognize and sometimes harder to illuminate, they can be forgotten and we trip. So when we don't think carefully about not only what does the culture look like, but how does that play out? Tell me about how I can do things within that culture. We can really make, especially if it's something like a merger, and we can really create a mess. Relational knowledge. This is really how things work together, not just who you work with, but how they work. So here's another story. I worked with the head of a very large pharmaceutical company with a CEO who was bringing on a new medical director. The medical director was coming from a place in Connecticut, and he was coming from research, and research had a very different culture. So I asked the CEO, if this knowledge transfer is effective and this person comes on board, how will you know? How will you measure me? And he said, and he was in New York, he said, if that person calls me up and invites me out for a beer, I know we've been effective. And I said, what does that matter? And he said, in research, they're very formal. They make decisions in the boardroom or in the conference room. Here at corporate, we're very informal. We make bigger decisions, but we make them sitting down together and having a meal and talking things out. So I went back to research and I said to this gentleman, now I know what you need to do. You have to go ask this person, the CEO, out for a beer. And he said, absolutely not. That would be political suicide. I said, I'll buy the beer. Just please go ask him for a beer. He did. And it worked out very, very well. Those kind of relationships, you don't know unless you ask about them. You need to ask for stories. So scientific and technical knowledge, these are the things that not only do you write down, because it's usually where we go when we think of knowledge transfer, but it's the rationale behind what you tried and it didn't work, what failed, and so you know not to do it again. In drug development, we think about classes of drugs. There are many classes of drugs that we know not to work on because of past experience. That may or may not be written down. Business and industry, if you think here about when somebody is leaving, how often do you say to them, what would you have done in 5 years? What do you think we're about to head into that you would have prepared for if you were going to be staying here? So there are trends and patterns that allow us to move forward that we need to think about. And I see leadership in each one of these. So I don't always, sometimes I do, but I usually don't pull that out separately. And as we know, when you're going through change, you're going through this emotional cycle. You're hitting all of these emotions. You're human, you can't help it. And so as you're going through these types of things like confusion or resignation or anger, which is not only normal, but really unavoidable, depending on the level. If you're also given tangible knowledge about things during that time, knowledge is neutral. So how you get to knowledge is not as neutral. But if you're told about a process or you're told how culture works or other things, you can start to ease up some of the anxiety that you see in this pattern. You won't stop the pattern from happening because we go through the emotional upheaval we go through as humans, but you can ease it down and help people to go through this a little bit more quickly. And as you know, as you're going through this feeling when you're hitting resignation and anger, and you get down to that place of undirected energy where you think, oh my goodness, I just am wiped out. I don't know what to do. If you're given some nuggets of fact and knowledge to work with, it can even help reduce the length of time that you feel you can't move, and then start to move you up again through the curve. So some of the things to keep in mind then is that knowledge can provide a neutral anchor. What we are all about in this work is making change palatable, making people as comfortable as possible, healing the kinds of things that bring people trauma during change, if we can, being able to make sure that during all of this, we're still providing business value, but we're making sure we never lose sight of individuals and how important they are and how difficult it is to go through some of these things. So knowledge can help you give some neutral bounds. I worked with DuPont Pharma when it was purchased by Bristol Myers Squibb, and most of DuPont Pharma was being laid off. Bristol Myers Squibb was bringing everything in-house into their facilities in New Jersey, away from Delaware. And it was a very, very difficult time. So what we needed to do during that was make sure that everybody understood, here's the knowledge that we really need and what we're working on. And it was 250 people that we trained how to do this process with each other so that they could do this together and be as respectful as possible. And it was the knowledge nuggets that allowed Bristol Myers Squibb to say, holy cows, DuPont is better at discovery than we are. We better not lay all of those people off. And they didn't. Many people had already left, but it allowed them to look at it. It was no longer an acquisition. It truly became a merger. And so through that, change management was seen as the hero along with knowledge management because it really increased the value of that acquisition. And then understand how you'll gather the knowledge. So know, what you need to do in order to make sure that the knowledge is available and you can do it in a way where there's not a lot of pain and hurt, but you do it very respectfully. You need to make an assessment. When you're making your assessments for your change management plan, include in it assessments for knowledge management. What do you have? What do you need? How will you get it? What's the culture like? So if you try to gather the knowledge, is this a culture that's so difficult that that's going to be something you need a whole nother intervention for? Communication, as John talked about, communication is key, as it is in all of change management. Be upfront, be honest, communicate often, communicate authentically, make sure that they build trust. All of that is as critical in knowledge management as it is in change management. Tacit knowledge is very difficult to get, but you can. You just have to ask the right questions. For example, you never say, why do you do it like that? You always say, oh, why do you do it like that? So it's just your whole demeanor that makes a difference. Being successful and respectful, that's, if you want successful knowledge transfer, it really makes the organization build resilience. So now you can go through so much more. You can move people around in the organization. You can actually have an agile organization when you can have knowledge management and change management integrated. And you can build trust as well. If people think that their knowledge is valued and that what they've done will matter now and in the future, that really builds trust. So make sure that there's a knowledge transfer plan. That is critical for success.
That's awesome. Kathy, John had also mentioned real quickly, he had said back on the slide where you have the major reasons people don't share knowledge, and it kind of fit in elsewhere as well. But he said in one industry he worked in, they were fearful of losing status, that they wouldn't be looked at as the SME if they gave that information away. And I can see that could be a problem.
Knowledge is power. That's something that, and I hit that too all the time. And you can work through that, but you have to really understand what else it's being replaced with. And so how will, if they're sharing knowledge to a larger group of people, now that gives them more power again, because more people now see them as the expert. So there's a lot of things to be thinking about, very change management oriented, but very true. And I know I'm about out of time, so I want to be respectful of that, but I created one thing for you folks that I've not done before. And that is, I took ADKAR and I thought, how do you integrate knowledge management into a change management plan? So what are some of the steps that you would take for knowledge against each one of the phases of ADKAR? Not everything will be in there. This isn't absolutely complete, but at least it may give you an idea of, you begin with all of the assessments and understanding, where are people at, and even understanding what has this organization gone through in the past, and how has that affected their willingness to share knowledge and to be honest, or have they learned that they have to keep knowledge as power, or they do lose status? And in that case, now you have to work with leadership. Now the culture is off. And that will inform the work that you do with your leaders in your change management plan. So I think that's a really important question, and a bit of questioning to be able to ask. And as you go through building desire, being able to have people understand why it's good for them personally to build some new skills or try some new things. And the knowledge that you need, the third step, being able to make sure that you've also got rewards and recognition in place, like you do for other things for knowledge transfer. And that there's coaching and other pieces for knowledge transfer that are available. And so each of these steps, you'll see that there's some aspects of knowledge transfer in there. I did not put in our change management steps because you know those, but these are the things that you can integrate for knowledge. And then I've given you some questions to ask to illuminate these things, a little bit of understanding of what are the stop. This is from APQC, American Productivity and Quality Center. The number one skill knowledge management professionals need to learn is change management. So there you go. If you're looking for job security, integrate the two.
I love it. This is great. Thank you for that. Steve also mentioned, he said you own your own knowledge can also trap you when in a job when you really want to move on to a new job. It can be worth creating a personal knowledge transfer plan to free you up to move on, right? I love that.
It is very true. And it's why you need to get experts to be able to be good at training. And they should only train or teach for an hour at a time so that they can do it and then learners can learn it, and try to make the learner as responsible as possible for their own learning. So the experts don't have to work so hard and the learners feel better about it. There you go. Okay, I think I'm out of time, right, Tonya?
Well, out of time insofar as we'd love to be able to open it up for dialogue with our participants, but no, you are here. I hope you'll be here for another 30 minutes.
Yes.
I will tell you, you piqued my interest when you mentioned, the knowledge management group that you just mentioned, APQC.
Oh, yeah, American Productivity and Quality Center, yeah. So
they're out of Houston, where I used to live, and I actually interviewed for a job there probably 15, 20 years ago. So, oh, how interesting. They have a lovely facility if ever anybody gets down there. So I did post into the chat a link to a Menti survey. We always like to try to get some feedback from our members and guests to make sure that we are hopefully providing you great content as well as opportunities to take away some really awesome things to help you in your own work. So I know personally for me tonight, Kathy, I definitely have. So what we'd like to do in this last 30 minutes is possibly maybe have you not share your screen anymore, Kathy. Unless we need it back up because someone wants to see something, by the way, but that way we can see each other a little bit more. And in relation to her slide deck tonight, you guys, Kathy has graciously agreed that we're gonna provide that out to our members. And so we're preparing to turn on some functionality that perhaps you'd seen us have in the past but when we did our website redesign, we kind of let it sit in the back burner for the time being. We want to bring that back forward. So you all as members will have the opportunity to, when you go out to MnCMN.org and there's a upper top right, you can log in with your membership credentials. That's going to give you a place to come to a resources section where we're going to begin making sure that our speakers and such allow us to share their material. And Kathy went above and beyond. She really thought about, she's got this great knowledge of knowledge management, but she really graciously thought about how to show us how that comes into play in change management. You did great. So I'm going to stop talking and let's let you all verbalize the questions you wanted to ask, or we can certainly have Doreen or others, vocalize them.
Oh,
Kathy, I will say that I swim deeply in the Y pool.
Nancy, having
And
met
it's one of my strengths, but sometimes it can feel like it's just in your face because I have to temper myself with the, why do you do it like that?
Oh.
Kind of approach. So it made me laugh when you said, you got to kind of take a different tact with how you ask that question, because for the most part, I'm really wanting to know, like, tell me more about, I don't understand, give me some more detail kind of thing. So I've really had to learn how to ask it differently. And I often say, give me more detail on that. So I can get deeper into that. But
all of the questions that we ask, usually you're dealing with somebody who's being maybe sensitive, maybe having a difficult time, maybe in a tough spot. So no matter what, you have to come at it with compassion and with an understanding of where they are, But one thing you can do, if you have a curmudgeon who doesn't really want to tell you all the steps, read the steps that you think this process is and put in 2 wrong steps. And they can't help themselves, but they'll correct you. They can't. So it can really help. I've done this work for big layoffs, closing down a medical facility, medical device facility in the Netherlands when many people were being laid off. In that case, I had a phenomenal internal partner to deal with who was learning from me about knowledge management. But you deal with some difficult situations. I've had people cry in my office or other things, and you really learn to be compassionate, but also to go for the truth. So
that sounds like a good, Kayleen asked, she said would appreciate hearing some techniques for making people responsible for their own learning.
Sure. So one of the things, there's a technique you can use. I kind of alluded to it when somebody is teaching and they're not very good. So you ask them right when the learner is sitting in front of them. They don't have to prepare, the teacher does not have to prepare ahead of time. But you say, so tell me the 3 key points in this hour that this person could learn that will tell you they know what they're doing. And tell me what are some of the words that you're going to use, the terms that they may not be familiar with, but they need to know. That allows then the learner to say, okay, those are the 3 key points that they need. You can give them the ability to have like a learning plan. We usually do that in knowledge transfer. There's a transfer plan, but there's a learning plan that the learner also has. So if you take a look at the book, Critical Knowledge Transfer by Dorothy Leonard from Harvard, I think it was published in 2016. I love the title. It's so sexy. Critical Knowledge Transfer. Makes you run right out and buy it. There's a lot of, Dorothy and I worked together on this book, and we created a workshop for GE where we actually mentored up 1 expert and 2 learners. And those people were responsible for, and they had a coach. I think a coach is very important. The coach would then set up, here's what you need to learn with the expert. Here's what you need to learn. So the learner and expert would meet together for a month. And then the coach gets back together with them and says, how are you doing? The learner can then say, I'm just not getting it. I haven't had enough time, or I'm not seeing the right things. But both the learner and the coach and the expert have been through training on this. And so it gives them a chance to really allow them to work together, but it also allows the learner to say, this isn't working and I need to do something different. I would take a look at some of the concepts in that book. I think they're worth reading. I don't get any money from it, don't worry.
So Kathy, this is John Murphy again.
Hi, John.
One of the things that I saw was when you said about, this me doing the training. I've been very fortunate at the American Cancer Society at Wells Fargo, at the Hartford, at a senior housing group, and at Medtronic. One of the things that we did, whether it was change management training or whatever, we worked with the subject matter expert, and we said, you will not train. You'll sit in the back of the room, you'll answer all the questions, but we're going to train, because if we can understand what you're actually trying to say, a little bit like you said, what are the 3 points or things like that. And if we can do that, and we can have a room of 60 people understand it, and then the questions that they ask really enhance all of the stuff of the knowledge management part that you were talking about.
Yes.
The procedures, the lacks, whatever that is. But now the person, the subject matter expert, sits in the back and they're listening. And we actually train the subject matter expert how to listen to the training. It's really fun. And so all of a sudden we find that don't have the subject matter expert train. My favorite training that I've ever seen in my life was, and I'll be quick, was at Wells Fargo, was a subject matter expert. And she was talking about mortgage and there's always these forms. And she says, if you ever see this, and she went over the form in 15 minutes, if you ever see this, I'll buy you a Coke. In the 4 years I've been here, I've only seen one. And everybody loved her. And I'm going like, she's not training, she's pontificating. Right. So, but from there, I became an advocate for my career of saying, don't let them talk until they. The cool part is if they sit in the back of the room, they can actually take the person's name and can follow up. And our people take the same name and we ask them if they followed up.
That's great.
Yeah, it's the additional accountability piece. And Cindy Colbert at Medtronic at the time when I was there was brilliant at it.
That's great. So there was a group that was sharing knowledge around a particular part of the med device that everybody was leaving this group and new people were coming in. So there was so much to share, many years worth. So when we went in, we actually did a symposium where we got the experts to tell stories about these different parts of the history of this piece of equipment. And then we created a Jeopardy game where we played Jeopardy and had questions answered. And the audience had then to say, here's what that answer is or what the question is about. One of the scientists stood up with a banjo and a chair and actually started to do a little song. I love this because I love these little songs. A friend calls them ditties. They're very cool. A little song about creating something out of the materials that they used, and the materials changed over time. And then they were able to go backwards and reuse materials again. And he created a song about it. And so anything you can do to make it interesting and relaxing, they're going to remember that. Adults remember stories. We don't remember just do it this way. We remember stories. So that's great. Anybody else?
Kathy, I actually posted something into the chat a few minutes ago. So have there been any additional knowledge management learnings or takeaways that have come from, I know it is the big crew change. That's what they called it in oil and gas, but I'm sure it's permeated other industries. Anything that's been learned about how people have thrived or not in the midst of that you haven't already talked about tonight?
Well, I think I think you'll see some of that in Dorothy's book example, but we were aware the big crew change was going to happen long before it happened. People knew that, just as we knew what was going to happen in pharma long before it happened. But I think one of the things that I have now learned about more, I just got off a project where there were 2 years I spent working for a state government. And the big crew change there was that actually they were bringing in, they had in this state agency, they had 200 people working the phones for folks who needed benefits of a certain type. And this was not Minnesota. And they needed, because of the pandemic, to bring in 1,500 agents and suddenly teach them and realize that most of what they needed to be taught had never been codified because these people had never left. And with the big crew change, I think we saw a bunch of that too, that things needed to be codified that never had been. So for the first time, I got very involved in a knowledge base. I had never really, I'd kind of poo-pooed the idea because I'd been in the tacit knowledge world for so long. I loved it. I realized that there are things, if you ask the right questions, there are things that even I thought of as tacit knowledge that you could codify as long as you were willing to go back and revise on a regular basis as things changed. And so I'm now seeing that one of the things we need to make more use of will be that kind of technology. So as large groups of people leave, it's not all gone, but it's hard to do. I think AI is going to help us a lot with that, quite frankly. But otherwise, I mean, if you look back through over the last 20 or 25 years, most of the processes have revolved around technologies like knowledge bases or expert locators or things like that. But I don't think we've really found a way to prepare for the large scale changes that happen in enough of a way. And part of it is we haven't prepared our culture to make sure that people were willing to change, to save their knowledge. We haven't prepared leadership to value it enough to give it time. Most of the time, knowledge sharing is an extra thing you do on top of your job. That's not going to fly. And so, I think it comes from the top down for things like that. We need to, that's where change management can help so much. We need to make sure leaders value knowledge sharing. That's where this drug development, actually, I worked at Pfizer for a long time, and I developed for them a knowledge sharing program for leadership called Retaining Knowledge that continued on for a long time. And it was because it started at the top, they learned to value it, and then it went all through the organization. All right.
Kathy, you mentioned a couple of times the idea that AI might be able to help in this field. What do you see happening with AI in the field of knowledge management?
I think it's, AI has been around a long time, and I think it's still moving slowly in some areas. But if we are able to, it's a garbage in, garbage out kind of a thing, really, too. If we are able to put some of, I think drug development is a good place where this is happening, to be able to put in some of the things that we see as tacit now, like I tried this before on this compound class and it didn't work. Plus, here are the things that did work on another compound class. AI is going to be able to put those things together in I think, a more robust, a faster way than humans could. We'll probably still need to be a part of it all. But I think it will be able to combine discrete areas of knowledge in a way that we haven't been able to in the past. At least I hope that's the case. Data visualization is doing some of the same things in a way that I think are really going to help. For example, there's a company that fixes elevators. And when you see, there's a wonderful video of an elevator repairman who goes to an elevator that's not working, and he has the goggles on. I don't know if they're the Microsoft goggles or which ones they are anymore, but as he's looking at what's going on with the elevator, on one side in the goggles, he's seeing the manual for the elevator. And on the other side, he's seeing an expert who happens to be his boss, who understands the problems of these elevators very well. So he's working on this while he's got the manual there and the expert there, much like you can now do in med device or other health pieces. And that's the kind of thing I think that's going to be happening that will really help us with knowledge transfer and knowledge management, especially
Yeah,
with
oil and gas is doing that at the pipelines or out on the rigs. Yep.
yes. And there'll be more of that. Now you combine that with artificial intelligence, hopefully, and there can be some real leaps that can happen. You know, I came on board in knowledge management at the time when personal computers were just getting going. Matter of fact, when I worked at Pfizer, I had 110 folks around the world, IT people, one of whom was the gentleman who networked the first computers at Pfizer. And he was about to retire and was working for me and said, when he was networking those, the head of Pfizer said, why are you doing that? We don't need to do that. But I think that, you know, what I'm seeing there is that they are using AI together with data visualization to be able to look at their portfolio of drugs and determine which drugs to make a bet on and which not. And it's phenomenal to see. Quiet quitting, yes. That affects knowledge management and knowledge transfer, because if somebody is actually quiet quitting, they're pretty much removed from really being engaged. And then it can be very difficult to get them to share or to learn. You know, the biggest problem in knowledge transfer is apathy. If somebody just doesn't care, it's very difficult to work through that. And that's how I see quiet quitting kind of affecting things. So, anything else we need to go through? This has been fun, you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah. Anything else rattling around people's brains that got triggered? That seems like such a weird word these days, but triggered by what's been talked about tonight? Y'all are ready for the holidays, or you got kind of spooked by all that snow that came down this morning, I bet too.
Thank God. Well, and is the term tribal knowledge still kind of in your vocabulary when it comes to knowledge transfer? Because I think I'm at a place now, brand new job, and there have people that have a lot of tenure.
Yep.
Just now starting to dive into what their SOPs say, and just even trying to understand the language they use, is, you know, trying to get it straight in my head and decipher it and stuff. And yeah, just sometimes because there's so much tribal knowledge, they all speak shorthand. I can't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That can be really tough. Without a mentor.
Ask my why, Kathy. It's hard for me to ask my why.
Yeah, but I like your whys, Nancy.
Me too. Me too.
With tribal knowledge, if you're brand new and everybody around you is really in that world, without a mentor, it's tough. You need someone that you can trust, that you can ask questions of. And if it's a culture where you're not allowed to do that, it's hard to be successful. And the organization, that's again where leadership is at, you know, needs to be in play with that, because they're creating a culture. And often, as we know, leadership doesn't even realize the culture they've created. They have an idea in their head because they're a little removed of what it's really like. But it's so important to have a mentor or a guide through that.
Well, that's funny, because that exact thing happened today to me. And when especially my manager says to me, don't ask them any questions, my head about wants to explode. And it feels like torture.
Well, that's where I'd ask a why.
Well, my comeback was, I'm not the problem per se by asking the question. You don't want me to ask a question because then it prompts the other person to do 20 other things you don't like. So it's not me, it's the other person doing the things you don't like. So let's look at the real kind of what you consider the problem. It's not me asking the question.
Yeah.
Kind of
Well-
thing. So I had to figure out quickly how to navigate around that.
That's
Hearing, don't go talk to that guy. I'm like, what? They're the people with all the knowledge. That's what I'm trying to suck out of them.
mhm. Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, very tough.
Steve just posted about having, corporate dictionaries for acronyms for things. And at Chevron, they have one called chaos. It is, yeah, literally called chaos for looking things up. That's awesome. Anybody else have a question or thoughts from tonight? Well, I did go ahead and give you guys kind of an early peek into the registration is open for our January event, where we're going to be having a panel of folks to talk about kind of where is change management right now in the hearts and minds of companies, either here in the Twin Cities or afar. And we've got a representative from kind of a local firm to be on the panel. Maybe perhaps many of you may know John Koss from Verseek. I invited him to take part because he's not only been a practitioner, but he's worked at a number of firms here locally helping to recruit for OCM talent. Also have a colleague of mine who owns a Change Staffing. It's literally called Change Staffing. It's a boutique firm for OCM talent that's going to be on the panel. And then I found a lovely lady out of Oregon who is an adjunct professor at a couple of colleges to be kind of that higher education element to really just talk about, what are the skills that are being sought after? What are the industries that are maybe really leaning into change management versus maybe those that perhaps could be waning? So that's what's on the docket for January. The one thing we're still looking for is the potential of a representative from kind of like one of the bigger international firms. So we do have some feelers out to Deloitte because they happen to publish kind of a tech trends document each year around this time. But certainly if any of you guys have any people that you think of that could really round out that panel, know that our intention is to really dive into, what's going on in the world of change management right now for staffing, recruiting, that sort of thing. Any final things, or should we send everybody on to having a nice, restful, healthy, hopefully, holiday season?
It feels holiday now with 3 inches of snow or however much
It
we got.
does, yes. Well, Kathy, thank you so much. I appreciate the, especially in those final few minutes, those couple of things that you did to really bring together what you know to make it even more palatable and understandable for us is awesome. Those of us that have been on the call today, we'll try to turn around as quickly as we can an email that will not only thank us for being here, but will provide that link to the meeting recording and any materials that Kathy helped to share tonight. So we'll point you in that direction very soon. So,
Great.
thank you, Kathy. Truly appreciate you not only volunteering on the regular with our organization through our programming team, but then bringing what you brought for us tonight. So awesome.
Kathy.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Take care.
Yep,
Excellent.
thank you, everybody.
Thanks.